I won't come back unless you really ask me.
No, you're not coming back at all,
that's
Harvey,
all right.
because
I
we've
don't
given
care.
we've given you many chances to come on this show and talk about things that we thought would be
Dave,
of general interest to people, and also to promote your little Mickey Mouse magazine here,
Dave,
your little newsletter, your little clubhouse fun and rainy day fun for boys and girls, your little weekly reader deal here.
Dave,
and you've blown every single chance you've had, Harvey. Every single chance.
So
you're
what?
not coming back.
Dave, I was a file clerk.
You're a
before I
dork,
knew you.
Harvey. Relax.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey. Behind every great person is great PR, like the kind provided by today's guest.
We're excited to talk with Jeff Newelt, a veteran PR and social media mocker who many know as Jaffee. Jeff, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
PR isn't something that most people grow up dreaming of doing. How'd you get involved in that field?
When I graduated University of Pennsylvania in 1993, I actually went to Fordham Law School for the year. I was going out many nights a week, my first time living in the city, to see unbelievable, incredible, all-star music at all these great places. And I wound up gravitating towards this Sunday night gig at a place called Mondo Cani in the Village, which was an all-star blues team. I used to, whenever I would go to gigs, I bring people with me. You know, I either go by myself or I'll bring a whole table worth of people. So yada, yada, yada. These musicians got a very special gig and they didn't know how to promote it. They had this amazing gig. And one of them says, "What about that guy, Jeff?" And I'm 22 at the time. "What about that guy, Jeff? He always brings people to our shows and he's a blabbermouth and he's, and I think that he would, might be someone good to help us." I told them that actually this is so good. At the time, New York City had what's called the acid jazz scene. Jazz hip hop was blowing up. And I said, if they could do jazz hip hop, this is so good. Why don't you make it a concept? Reggae meets jazz starring you. And the next thing you know, this thing called Rub-a-Dub Jazz that I wound up, I was brought in to help. And the next thing you know, I wound up being the boss and the promoter. And I would be out pre-internet on the lawn in Central Park with these little flyers, sort of like eyeballing it and knowing who might be into it. And I'd give out flyers on a Saturday, and by Monday there'd be 22 people there who I met. And I knew how to do it. And if I'm into it, and yada yada yada, that thing wound up on the front page of the New York Times style section, the Sunday style section. Everyone went back on tour. That sort of ended. What am I going to do? Then 3 different people said to me, "Why don't you do PR? Because you did PR. That's PR. Talking about stuff and getting people exciting about it and getting them to write about it." And so then I got into PR. My first boss was named Sal Cataldi, and I had cool clients like the American Movie Classics Channel's Horror Movie Fest, and I had to take Boris Karloff's daughter to Tavern on the Green on Halloween, to see the world's largest Frankenstein collection and all, fun kind of stuff. And I'll tell you quick how I wound up mixing the PR and the comics, and I'll take you to sort of now-ish, is in 2006, 2007, I was working at a big PR agency, and for 4 years already, I was working on Samsung. So my whole daytime life was Samsung. I was, doing tech PR and meeting, going to CES and doing booth tours for Walt Mossberg and David Pogue, and doing the real, Samsung thing. And while I was doing that, that's when the webcomics boom started. That's when broadband started happening. In 2006, MySpace was big. Okay, set the scene. So what MySpace was in 2006, 2007, nothing has ever achieved ever. because MySpace in 2006, 2007 was an explosive social network that people were on, and the coding didn't go to all hell yet, so that the pages could actually be designed. So all of a sudden, while I had the day job with doing PR for Samsung, I started getting paid to, at first I did it as a volunteer, but then all of a sudden I was being paid to run and create, along with a designer who I would direct, MySpace pages for Rick Veitch, who worked on Swamp Thing with Alan Moore and many other things. David Lloyd, the artist of V for Vendetta and a great creator in his own right. Brian Talbot worked on Sandman with Gaiman, and another great, Larry Marder, who was one of the execs at Image, but he created his own thing called Bean World. Douglas Rushkoff, who I first met interviewing for Hebe, which at the same time I wanted to becoming comics editor of. So I interviewed him for Hebe, and the next thing you know, I was doing his MySpace page, and Paul Pope, and wound up with Paul not just doing his MySpace page, but Paul Pope just recently, his THB recently just came out from First Second. They're finally reprinting his indie classic from the early 90s, 5 volumes. But in around that time, he got a deal with DKNY Jeans to do a clothing line, of like comics clothes. And I said, that's amazing. And he had some money, from them to do some PR. There was the fork in the road. Imagine one day I have a really important Samsung executive meeting. At the same time, my freelance client, Paul Pope, had a walkthrough of the clothes with the Wall Street Journal journalist. What do I go to? My destiny, I went with Paul to DKNY, and because of broadband, I didn't need fax machines or Xerox machines anymore. I started my own PR social media agency because all of a sudden, all these people were paying me to do the MySpace and this and that. And I figured, let's give it a go. And now it's 2026. So I've been on my own since 2008. So essentially since then, 2006, having the model of different kinds of clients who most of the time I love, doing a mixture of public relations, social media, helping them do their Facebook and Twitter and events and launch parties. All right, so that's part of my origin.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe.
You've worked with many legends over the years. Let's start with autobiographical comics pioneer Harvey Pekar. What can you tell us about that?
It's more what I can ask him to tell you himself.
Hey, it's me, little Harvey. How you doing? Guess what? This is not disrespectful for Jeff to do, because he used to do this to my face when I was alive. And I would tell him, quit it. You gotta quit it, man. That's really annoying.
And then Jeff, would have an argument. So little Harvey's going to be my mascot and my helper for the rest of this interview. So with Harvey Pekar, I've always adored his work, and I've been lucky enough to become friends with or work with people who I desperately wished to be friends with. Meaning, I always said I should be friends with Harvey Pekar and talking about jazz with him. And then for whatever reason, my karma's good on those particular types of aspirations. So I first met Harvey, believe it or not, by interviewing him for Penthouse magazine. At the time, a good friend of mine, Rachel Kramer-Bussell, a fabulous writer, she was the literature editor, and they were doing cool stuff. And I interviewed him about Macedonia, drawn by Ed Piskor, who recently passed away, also. And I interviewed him for Penthouse. And then I was already comics editor of something called Smith Magazine. At the same time I started doing those MySpace pages for all those people, I became comics editor of Hebe Magazine, where I ran the reviews section and chose the people to do the back strip in the back. Like I had Bob Fingerman do a strip, Evan Dorkin do a strip for Hebe, some fabulous people. But I was also comics editor of Smith Magazine. Smith being the Smith, it's Larry Smith is the Smith and Smith magazine, and Larry was my editor-in-chief when I was features editor of 34th Street magazine at University of Pennsylvania. So years later, he started a personal storytelling digital project called Smith, And I said, why don't you do comics on it? And he said, why don't you be the comics editor? So I added that to my plate while I was still full-time at Samsung, comics editor of Hebe, doing these MySpace pages. So the first graphic novel to go on the web was something called Shooting War. And Shooting War was a friend of mine was embedded in Iraq as a journalist, and I had the idea that he can, turn a lot of those things into a graphic novel, and he did. And it wound up becoming a book where I made one of my first graphic novel guest appearances. But the next graphic novel on Smith, and this is all going towards me meeting and working with Pekar, was something called A.D. New Orleans After the Deluge. Josh Neufeld was an artist. He's a nonfiction comics journalist and graphic novelist who started by doing his own independent comics and drawing for Harvey Pekar. But for Smith, I helped edit something called New Orleans After the Deluge, which was serialized online nonfiction following the lives of 6 different Katrina survivors. And it became a hit online because on weeks that he didn't put up comics, we would put up actual podcast interviews with the real people. So we actually were really using extra features in a way that I thought was not superfluous. That was and then so the online experience was fabulous, but then it got the core story itself got a nice it got popular on the web, and then got a book deal. So so Dean Haspiel is a cartoonist who, in addition to his own fabulous creations, is a longtime collaborator of Harvey Pekar. In 2005, he drew The Quitter. And actually, Dean Haspiel was responsible for getting the American Splendor movie, giving the idea to Ted Hope, the producer, and making that happen. So Dean was also the head of a webcomics collective called Activate, which I forgot at the same time as being comics editor of Heap, comics editor Smith, MySpace person, and Samsung. I became the minister of hype of Activate, a webcomics collective doing free comics online. I was like their fifth Beatle. It was Dean Haspiel, Chip Zdarsky, Dan Goldman, Josh Neufeld, Nick Bertozzi, Pedro Camargo, Michel Fife, so many great people, and they were putting their stuff online, and I was part of that too. So then Dean edited on Smith Magazine an anthology, which, knock on wood, poo poo poo, I think finally will have its day in print sometime soon, called Next Door Neighbor, where he had fabulous creators do true life next door neighbor stories, including Jonathan Ames of Bored to Death fame, who did one with Nick Bertozzi. And my contribution to that project, which was edited by Dean, was because I was doing Rick Veitch's MySpace page, and Dean was going to approach Harvey to do a next door neighbor story. I said, you know what? Why don't we match Dean with Rick Veitch, two legends who never worked together yet. And Rick was really into it. And so that was sort of my first entrance into making something happen with Harvey Pekar. Fast forward to Harvey talking to Dean and saying,
Dean, you know what? Maybe I should do one of those webcomic things. Everybody's getting a book deal out of this. I want some of that money too. What could I do?
and he's like, well, you got to talk to Jeff Newelt. Let's and see what can.
All right, whoever that is, let me put us in touch.
And the next thing you know, I'm talking to Harvey Pekar on the phone, and we're conceptualizing fast something called the Pekar Project, which is essentially, we couldn't use the name of American Splendor for this. It's essentially American Splendor stories online on this Smith magazine. And the idea is there were 4 different artists who we picked together. Joseph Remnen, who went on to draw Harvey Pekar's Cleveland, Sean Pryor, a fabulous artist who did a lot of work for Royal Flush magazine. Add that to the list in 2006. I forgot I was comics editor of that too. But and we did so Sean Pryor was a fabulous artist who then who recently did the Blondie graphic novel with Z2, which makes a lot of great music graphic novels. Royal Flush was a magazine that was a combination of it was rock and roll and comics, and we were trying to think of what could Harvey and Sean Pryor do, and we decided that we were going to send Harvey Pekar, Bad Brains Ministry, Iron Maiden, and Judas Priest to review, and it's kind of like you irritate an oyster to get the pearl, and so that was one of my first appearance in a Harvey Pekar comic as a character. He says,
I'm not making any money on this. I'm doing it as a favor for a couple of guys.
That's me and Josh Bernstein, who now is the head runner of, founder of Z2 Comics, and at the time was Royal Flush and me. He says,
I'm not making it. It's a favor for a couple of guys who say they'll promote my comic work. I should live so long.
This is coming out at the same time. So Harvey says, we decide that on the 4 artists, it was Sean, Joseph Remnant, Tara Seibel, who he knew from Cleveland, and Rick Parker, who was about Harvey's age, who was a longtime letterer for Marvel, and he drew Marvel's Beavis and Butthead comics and is a great cartoonist. So we started this thing online, and it got pretty popular pretty fast. And for Harvey's, the strips were great. I made another appearance in a strip there. One day Harvey asked me, he goes,
So what kind of Jew are you?
and I'm like, what do you mean? He's like,
Where's your family from?
and I said, actually Vienna. The Newelt name, in Vienna, Neuwelt.
He's like, no, you think it's Vienna. They said it was Vienna, but I bet you anything that they were Galicianers.
And so he goes into a whole lecture to me as to like, because I was his editor, and being editor means he would call me and say, this is what I'm going to do for the strip, which artist should do it, and then we say, great, or I have a suggestion or something. That's how we did the comics. But in this case, he's asking me all these things, and he gives me an entire lecture on Galicia, and it was just so great. That was one of my first weeks working with him. And the next day he calls me.
He's like, I got another story for you, man.
And I'm like, oh, awesome. What is it? He's like, and it starts up.
So I'm talking to you.
Oh, shoot. I left him out.
So I'm talking to you.
And he proceeds to repeat the entire, the lecture that he gave me the day before. He said, that would make a good comic. And Joseph Remnant, the artist, who did a fabulous job, he had a great idea, and I think it's very interesting that we Harvey said, and I said, of course, is that I had this as a phone call with Harvey, but Joseph Remnant said, why don't we set it in a comic convention, just be visually more interesting? And Harvey's like, yeah, because that's not essential. It's still it's a real conversation. It's still autobiographical, but those are the kind of things you can do to make something, like a lot of Harvey Pekar's work is very verbal, or it's a lot of, and so we wound up doing this Pekar project, and I'm very happy that I got to do something like this while he was alive. We threw his 70th birthday party for him. And the next thing you know, we had a gallery show and a party for Harvey. And Toby came out, Toby the genuine nerd who loves White Castle hamburgers.
Toby, you keep eating those, man. It's not good for you.
Harvey, I love White Castle hamburgers, and you shouldn't be telling me what I should and shouldn't eat.
Hey, Toby.
No, you can't have any of my White Castle hamburgers, so please don't even ask.
Yeah, can I have a fry?
Okay, but just a couple, Harvey.
You've expressed a desire to search the internet for all the references to Pekar being a curmudgeon and switching them to mensch. How does his real-life persona differ from popular portrayals?
People often ask me that in the context of the movie. Like, did you like the movie? What did you think of the movie? How was the movie? And I said the movie was incredible. It's fantastic, but because it's a movie, because it's 2 hours as opposed to thousands of pages of a lifetime's worth of comic book stories, you really can't do everything. So the movie, for better or worse, focused on the curmudgeonly aspects of his personality and of his battle with cancer, when things were, it was very stressful, and so a lot of the menschiness of Harvey didn't come out, and I'll explain in a couple of ways. I got to see it in person when we went to Sokolowski's Polish restaurant. It's the same place, by the way. If you haven't seen the Anthony Bourdain Cleveland episode, the Bourdain Pekar team up, I consider that American Splendor movie 1.5.
Well, the food is good, the prices are right, and the portions are big.
Yeah, I'm gonna need some help with this. Cleveland does not suck.
I've been telling you. This is what life is all about.
So Harvey took me to the same Polish restaurant, and they wouldn't let him pay. And when I was standing behind him, it's sort of an old school Polish cafeteria with fabulous old school Polish food, and I think 9,000 yards of kielbasa or something served. I don't know, but so Harvey's about to pay, and he takes out his wallet, and they won't let him pay, and he gets embarrassed, and he's like, "No," "No, you really can't do that. You guys, I'm gonna give you the money." So they're like, "Harvey, you're not paying. You are not paying." "Oh, come on!" And he didn't pay, and we went to the table, and he just couldn't. Every time it's fresh, meaning like he just doesn't expect it. He never, he didn't, and it's so appreciated. He's like, "Man, they shouldn't," and so that's one aspect of Mencius. Another entire aspect of Harvey's personality is his enthusiasm for underappreciated artists that he loves, which translates into the menschiness of of creating a separate body of work from his comics work. He did a lot of essays also in comics form, but on klezmer musicians, on jazz musicians, on obscure Yiddish novelists. So he really went out of his way to help hundreds of young artists in many mediums. I have so many stories of different jazz musicians who I know who were also friends with Harvey, who he helped them in some incredible way. For example, my friend Jamie Saft. Jamie Saft is a brilliant keyboard player who has a number of records on John Zorn's Tzaddik label and was a member of Electric Masada. But originally, I think it was Harvey. Jamie said to me that, Harvey told John to hire me because he heard me on something else. And he's like, "John, man, you gotta hear Jamie." And he would do that with so many of these jazz music, and he was doing so many things that never got reported except for through these circles of his creator and artist friends we supported, wrote about, and he would really go out on a limb for these guys.
You also did some work with Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist Art Spiegelman, creator of Mouse. What did that entail?
Before I worked with Art, I was working with Francois Roulet, his wife, who was the art editor for a million years of The New Yorker and cover editor. And she is also co-publisher, founder of Toon Books, which is a incredible imprint or publisher of children's comics and graphic novels, but they're done by guys like Art Spiegelman, Ivan Brunetti, Dean Haspiel, Noah Van Sciver. So it's a completely incredible line. I wound up doing some PR and social work for there. And because I do some work not just in comics, but with music. I worked with the Zappas for many years, writing the official @Zappa feeds and doing things for them. Art Spiegelman had a multimedia show called Wordless that was coming to New York. And so someone thought of me because I'm often the guy that people go to for the convergence projects, the things that are for the comics audience, but also for the Beatles audience, like The Fifth Beatle about by Vivek Tiwari about Brian Epstein, the Jewish homosexual manager of the Beatles in the late 60s who had a pretty rough life because of those two aspects and then some. So, that was music and comics. And for this, you had Art Spiegelman on stage with I'm forgetting his name, but he led a group called, I think it's Philip Johnson, a group called the Microscopic Septet. And he took these old comics by cartoonists that he loved, like Franz Mazariel and Lynn Ward of the Woodcuts, and they created this multimedia presentation. And so I my job was to get the people who are looking for what's the cool thing, not in comics this month, but in culture in general. So I help take one of my specialties is help taking that comics thing out of comics and into culture. What is the subset of comics that should also go in the top culture pile? And it's my job and mission to push things into that pile, and also, I wound up I put on my other hat at the same time and did a studio tour with him for Hebe, and took pictures and interviewed him and had him do a show and tell about some of his favorite graphic novels. And we used some of those videos for social. So I just, I helped him to be himself and make promotion, not a pain in the butt.
As I understand it, he doesn't really like being interviewed that much. He doesn't like maybe that side of it, that sort of promotional side. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
A lot of these guys, and Harvey's not one for small talk, then they don't suffer fools, So you really have to, for whatever reason, I've always been someone who not only has been, I've interviewed a lot of celebrities in my day. When Larry Smith of Smith Magazine was my editor at Penn, in one year I interviewed Stephen King, Stan Lee, Frank Zappa, Dave Barry, Philip Roth, Adam Sandler, Dave Spade, Colin Quinn, and Judd Apatow. Because after that, sort of like nothing can faze me. And then in the 90s, I actually wound up, it's the first time I've ever said these words publicly, but I'm clean, but I actually worked for Jeffrey Epstein's publicist, Peggy Siegel, for 6 months. And my job was, she was the ultimate celebrity film premiere person in New York. So I didn't even know who he was. I didn't see him in a thing, but I would do my job was to just help at these big celebrity premieres. So literally at one of the events, Donald Trump and Marla Maples were assigned to me. I had to take them to their seat, and he buttered my popcorn actually. And so all this said, I have a lot of experience with whether it's celebrities or people who are my idols. And the challenge for me is, can I be interesting to them? Whether it's as a client, or as a collaborator, or if I'm doing an interview with them, I know they're interesting to me. But that's sort of like I get sort of the eye of the tiger to actually be, to be interested, to them, which I keep rubbing my nose like this, and my son counts each time I'm not supposed to. It's not good. It's a bad looking habit. And I'm saying it in public to shame myself, because maybe that'll make me stop going like this.
You had the honor of doing a live reading of legendary Mad Magazine cartoonist Al Jaffee's snappy answers to stupid questions with Al Jaffee himself.
Would you like a haircut, sir?
No, I came here just to catch up on the latest jokes.
Did you hear the one about the cockeyed barber?
That was a comeback.
What's the backstory?
So Al, as you said, renowned for Mad's fold-in and snappy answers to stupid questions. I was hired to help promote Mad Life, a biography by Mary Lou Weissman, but it's sort of a biography meets autobiography, because Al Jaffee, for this book, created, I think, at least 40 new illustrations to go with it. So Art Spiegelman actually called it an embedded graphic novel within this biography, and it's an incredible work. So it was my job to take this comics-related book and tell people, because I passionately believe in it as well, that this is something very important to check out. And it it's actually a, p- a punch in the face and a punch in the soul how powerful this book is, and how like I'm gonna have to give it another read after getting to know him much better after it, because it shows how Al Jaffee's his mother and father escaped from Lithuania. Okay, this is, the Nazis, they escaped from Lithuania to the United States. And before then, the way that Al Jaffee, when he was young in Poland, and well, Lithuania was part of Poland at the time, the way that he could placate the anti-Semites was to draw for them. He would draw them pictures in the dirt with a stick. And he wound up, using his drawing ability at a young age to protect himself and his brother from anti-Semitic bullies. So picture this: when he's around 9, and I think he had a younger brother, they got to the United States, but his mother was a little bit touched in the head, as they say, unfortunately, and she wanted to take the boys back to Lithuania. You're talking back to Hitler. The father stopped it, and she went back. She went back, and she was kind of a. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but Al Jaffee, who's known for um, decades of some of the most sublimely frivolous and silly illustrations, um, comes from this depth of, there's a depth of sorrow, sorrow and pain, and witness that early life. He really is a great example of the transformative power of humor for yourself and others. Using it to heal himself, using it to get himself not beat up, using it to uplift the world and make everybody else have a little bit of a lighter day. And that's kind of the kind of guy he was. So I did a pretty, and so I met him from doing this. And then I wound up, there was a Drew University. They had an interesting, they had a budget in their graphic novel club, actually a decent budget to bring over, some comic artists for presentations, and I happen to know one of the guys in the club. So I went there once with once with Paul Pope, and I went there with Harvey. Actually, when he was around, and we did a spiel, and I went there with Al Jaffee, who I knew from promoting the Mad Book. And when I'm in the car with Al Jaffee on the way back from our presentation, which went well, I basically, each time I interviewed the people in front of the class and we do a slideshow, on the way back, I told him that coming up a few weeks from then, I was producing a live comics reading at Joe's Pub for Heeb magazine. A live comics reading meaning comics presented on the screen, and the creators with their friends or with actors, or they're dramatizing it, but done in a way that's it's not hi-fi or high tech, but done very mindfully, so that for the production on a big. We did it at Joe's Pub and on a big screen. Molly Crabapple was in it, Dean Haspiel, and I, as you heard, I was given the approval because I did the Harvey voice for Harvey and to his face. I can give an answer when people ask me, why, what do you think of that? Because I wound up doing it actually on stage about 10 different times at different places, where I would match up American Splendor stories to music, and I would read it, and I would time it, and I wound up doing it at Joe's Pub. And I said to Harvey, we're doing this live comics reading, and coming up, and he's like, "Oh, that sounds interesting." I mean, not to Harvey. I said to Al Jaffee, sorry, I said, "Al." All of a sudden, it hit me, and it hit me that I said, Did you ever do Snappy Answers to Stupid Questions live?" And he's like, no, no. He has a very deep voice. No, it's kind of like this. Jeff, that's a very interesting idea. He had a really deep, soft, kind voice. And I said to him, I have this idea. What if it's like the 2,000-year-old man, and I'm Carl Reiner and you're Mel Brooks? I do the straight lines, I do the stupid questions, you do the snappy answers. And he's 94 at this point already, and he says, let's do it. And so the next thing you know, we decide to do it. I take my friend Josh Bernstein, again, editor of Royal Flush and current publisher of Z2. He lent me some of his old yellowed snappy answers to stupid questions book, because we decided that the scans that we project for that particular comic had to be the yellowed original paperback versions. And it wound up actually going pretty well, and he loved it, and it wound up being a nice match where I would ask him, I would say, Al, are those flowers for me? And he'd say, no, I'm holding them and I'm not going to let them go. Or who knows? And then I'd ask the next question. He'd give the next stupid. And so that's how we did that. And he just he was just ready to go and experiment. He said, let's do it. And it worked out nice. And the next time we hung out was actually, it was my first time I met Rob Kuttner. First time I met Rob Kuttner was because Rob was doing one of his all-star audio CD comedy productions, and it was called 2776, and it was a political comedy album, and one of the skits was Mount Rushmore. And Mount Rushmore was going to be in the studio, Dick Gregory, Dick Cavett, Joe Franklin, and Robert Klein. So it turned out Robert Klein had to cancel. Turns out I see a Facebook message from Amy Rothberger that says, we need someone to pick up a celebrity at Penn Station. And I say, what in the world? I'm just going to see what that is. And then it turned out that someone had to perhaps go pick up Dick Gregory. She was doing, when the time comes, this was a few days from then. And then, so I'm like, oh, and, she says, my friend Rob Kuttner is doing this comedy thing. And it turned out, I found out that Robert Klein canceled. This was about the same exact time I did, or a little bit after, when me and Al Jaffee did Snappy Answers. And I said to myself, you know what? Al could do it, because nobody really thought of him as a performer. And I suggested it, and he's like, yes. And then the next thing you know, Al was slotted into there. And I wound up talking to the editor of Hebe at the time, when Hebe went, this is a little later in 2012 or 13, when Hebe was just online. And I said, would you pay for a limo if I took the limo and one at a time picked up Dick Cavett, Dick Gregory, Joe Franklin, and Al Jaffee? And basically, turned out that, and like, would you, I said, would you just pay the expenses? Would you pay for the thing? And would you also pay? I had the idea that we'd pick each one up from their spots in a limo, and all together go to Fine and Shapiro to pick up some deli to bring to the recording studio. And while I'm there, in the limo, I interviewed, and the interviews ran on Hebe, and it was a good win-win situation for everyone. A lot of fun. But that was another, project I did with Al, and it turned out that someone was in town, maybe the president, whoever it was then, and we wound up, Rob, myself, and Marissa, who did the Borscht Belt. I don't know if you ever saw the Borscht Belt, the dilapidated Borscht Belt. Marissa Scheinfeld did the dilapidated Borscht Belt book of like all the Catskills hotels, but like their ruins. It's this incredible book. But then she does a lot of great Yiddishkeit related photo projects. But she came along to photo. So it was me, Rob, and her. Dick Cavett, Dick Gregory, Joe Franklin, and Al Jaffee for about 3.5 hours in the limo together.
What are you working on these days?
As usual, I'm lucky enough to be helping promote some of my favorite people and some of their work. Most recently, Bob Fingerman, who had a fabulous semi-autobiographical series of graphic novels called Minimum Wage, has a graphic novel out via, he's an amusing Jew, and the publisher of Cosmic Lion Comics, who published Printopia, Ellie Schwab, is a amusing Jew. But Printopia by Bob Fingerman, if I was still comics editor of Hebe and giving my book of the year, this would be my #1 book of last year. It's gorgeously illustrated in the tradition of Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder. It's about a woman who works at a Kinko's type place, and she becomes utterly absorbed in the zines that these people from these various mind-blowingly peculiar and interesting subcultures are doing. And so Bob Fingerman really takes you there in and in New York City. I don't want to spoil it, but it is just a bizarre, gorgeously illustrated graphic novel that needs to be seen and read to be believed. I'm also helping Willie Mendez, was part of the original underground comics boom, a contemporary of Crumbs and Trina Robbins. She also has been doing some of the most incredible Jewish spiritual art. Coming this April is going to be the full volumes 1, 2, and 3 of Queen of the Cosmos from Fantagraphics. Also, I don't want to not plug my always pal collaborator, Booster, Dean Haspiel, and his Chest Face and his original comics. He was the one who did Harvey Pekar's Quitter, The Alcoholic with Jonathan Ames, and you should look up Chest Face, about sort of a mutated comedian. And Rick Veitch's Maximortal is back as True Man. Rick Veitch, who worked on Swamp Thing in the heyday with Alan Moore and had his own run of Swamp Thing that was legendarily cut short because it showed Swamp Thing as Jesus on the cross. And that was in 1988. And actually, the big news this year is that they are going to be able to print it because the world has changed a bit and it's not as earth-shatteringly blasphemous as it was then. And speaking of Jesus, it's been quite an honor for me to work with Lloyd Kaufman of Trauma and Toxic Avenger fame, helping him promote his and Matthew Klickstein's book of Lloyd Kaufman interviews, and getting to know the crew doing the Toxic Avenger comics like Matt Bors and Fred Harper, whose latest team up was the inevitable, long-awaited Toxic Avenger meets Jesus Christ.
Well, thanks so much, Jeff, for joining us. This has been fun.
Your questions were right on. You sort of got me excited to do a little show and tell.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.